Oh, by the way, it is storming over here, so, like, if I cut out.
Okay, so
why.
if you disappear, I'll know
Yeah.
why.
Yes.
Sure.
All right. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Adcast, a podcast for the study of modern visual culture. I'm your Japanese-German captain at the age of 14, Renu.
And I'm your Genki glasses-wearing Evangelion destroyer, Soup.
This week, AT stands for Absolute Terror and Anniversary Time, because we'll be talking about Evangelion 2.0 You Cannot Advance. Also known as Evangelion Shin Gekijouban Ha.
Ha!
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 But before we get into that, what are you up to?
Well, to be honest, I mean, it actually has not been that long since we recorded the last episode. We're recording this one pretty far in advance, all things considered, so that we can get it out, because we'll both be doing kind of like holiday stuff.
Yeah.
And it's just more convenient this way. But we have since started that project that we talked about last time we ended the podcast, where we have started to play Ace Attorney, the Ace Attorney trilogy, every Saturday around 8 to 10-ish PST.
Yep.
And that's been super fun. We've done it for 2 weeks now. We're probably gonna go on a little break for the holiday season. Which is actually funny now that I think about it. When the episode comes out, we'll be pretty close to actually just returning from the holiday season. So I guess that's kind of a moot. Yeah, I was gonna say, I guess it's kind of a moot point. We don't really need to mention it. But yeah, we've been doing that. That's been super fun.
Yeah.
We're splitting up the voicing of the characters, and I'm having a blast.
It's really fun.
We're doing some lawyering. It's a good time. I love the Ace Attorney games with all my heart. I have a lot of sort of passionate feelings about them, and maybe once we finish the trilogy, we can somehow track down a copy of Apollo Justice. I'm not gonna say how, and maybe we can talk about the Ace Attorney games as a kind of like, you know, as a series, because
dude, I'd love to. Yeah,
I do love Ace Attorney. It's one of the, it's funny because, like, even though I have a lot of problems with all of the mainline games that come after Apollo Justice, it's still one of those series where no matter what happens, I will buy the next game in the series. And it's one of those things that really does like move consoles for me. If not that Ace Attorney is ever really something that comes out on a system that like is highly inaccessible. Usually what causes me to move systems is Fire Emblem. Like if there's a Fire Emblem game coming out, I'll like buy a Switch or whatever, right?
Right.
But yeah, so that's what we've been up to. Other than that, I've been playing through Dark Souls 2 on the channel. Again, probably by the time this episode comes out, I'll have been on a bit of a hiatus because I'll be away from my computer for the holiday season. But yeah, other than that, really not been up to much. Have you been up to anything more interesting or substantial?
I guess like some home changes. So one of our foster cats, or I guess our last foster cat, Marco, he got adopted yesterday. Wow. Yeah, it was like, I knew it was going to be the one that would really like emotionally wreck me because we've had him, I guess, the longest out of all the foster cats this year, and you know, with everything that happened with Polo and his brother, and it was I knew that whatever home we got for him it just had to be the best home we could possibly get for him, right? Because it just felt like that's what he deserves, especially after everything that happened. And so we got contacted like on Friday by this police constable who was looking to adopt a third cat. And
I thought you were gonna say for the police station. I was like, what police station lets you have cats? What?
That would be amazing. But I wouldn't actually want him there because that'd be kind of scary for him. But
oh yeah, that'd be terrifying.
Yeah. No, this constable, he lives like in the countryside, so like I guess like an hour away from us. And yeah, he wanted to adopt Marco as a playmate for one of the younger of his two cats, because she apparently is getting she's kind of like starved for, I guess, playtime and stuff like that with another cat, and the cat that the other cat that they do have is older and not really interested in that. So yeah, so that's kind of in line with what we wanted for Marco. Is we wanted a playmate for him, since we weren't obviously able to adopt him out with Polo anymore, and we wanted him to, you know, have a nice area to explore around and to just have, you know, people who would be able to be available and play with him as well, like that kind of thing. And this seemed like such an ideal fit for him, and the people were really nice. So, yeah, now that we got to meet them yesterday and everything went well, they seemed knowledgeable about cats. Like the wife of the couple, she has had cats all her life, kind of deal. So she has plenty of experience with them, and yeah, so we adopted him out, and the couple was nice enough to text us when they got home and how they were treating Marco and how they set him up in the house. And apparently today he started warming up a little bit. Like he hopped up into the lap of the constable a couple of times and found the litter box, and he's eating. And so it's nice. I'm glad to get updates, and it's really sweet that they have been updating us so frequently, because, you know, we miss him. Yeah. So that was like some bittersweet news. Like, obviously really good that he has a permanent home now, which is awesome. But yeah, the house has been super quiet without him. Like, he has been the most vocal presence in this household to date. And yeah, it's been very quiet without him. But yeah, in, I guess, like some cheerier news, even we my roommate, before we had settled all this Marco adoption business, decided that he was going to adopt a dog, and they're having that meetup this coming weekend.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, so we'll be meeting the dog and hopefully bringing it into the house if everything goes well, and after that will be like holiday stuff. So yeah.
Nice. What kind of do you know what kind of dog?
Yeah, it's an Australian Shepherd. It has a red and white coat, and it's well, he is really freaking adorable. He's 7 months old, or 8 months old, sorry.
Babe.
And yeah, he baby.
Babe.
Very playful and energetic baby.
Oh, I hope he gets along well with the cats then.
Yeah, that's what we're anticipating. Is well, the foster taking care of him right now said that she owns like a separate ferret rescue, and he doesn't really bother with the ferrets at all. He just kind of ignores them. So we're hoping that's how he'll treat the cats. But he hasn't been cat tested yet, I don't think. So I guess we'll find out. Yep.
Nice.
Yeah, I guess that's it. You know.
Yeah.
Lots of animal updates.
Things just kind of like slowed down a little bit during this time. Like, everybody's just gearing up for the holidays, and nothing's really happening. I mean, obviously, this year has been quite unique in in that respect of everything seems to happen all at once and not at all.
Yeah.
So yeah, I guess it's like I mean, honestly, I mean, as one gets older, I feel like the holiday season can very much kind of begin to slip away from you as like a thing that brings you like a vast amount of joy. Actually, quite a lot of people, adults especially, get depressed during the holidays for various reasons. And it's interesting to me because like I like you really do miss the kind of childlike joy and splendor you had for the holiday season. Like, there was a nice long winter break. get to hang out with your family if that was a thing you wanted to do. You celebrate various, winter holidays, and you might get presents, and that's all like well and good. And then as you grow older, you're just like, oh shit, it's like Thanksgiving, and it's Christmas. Oh, it's Christmas, right? So yeah, it's been interesting. Looking down at the calendar and being like, Jesus Christ, it's already the 13th of December. How is that even possible?
Yeah, it's been moving fast.
Yeah, December has been a blur for me. My brain still thinks it's like August, which is I mean, yeah, like I still think it's August, and I look outside and there's like rain, and I'm like, what the huh. Yeah. All right. I mean, it's interesting thinking about where I was last year around this time, and how how hopeful I was around December of this
how
this time
young
last
and
year.
Hopeful.
And just how much this year has absolutely just kind of crushed everything. And I don't know, it's certainly been a rough one for a lot of reasons for pretty much everybody on the planet. And here we are, pretty much at the end of it. I like legitimately feel like I went to sleep and I woke up and 2020 was almost over. And I honestly don't know how to feel about that, because on one hand, Jesus Christ, that's a year of my life, and we've pretty much lost that year of our life, and we're not going to get it back. And on the other hand, oh man, does it like, it just kind of feels like I really do just want the year to be over. I know that the sort of passing of time has, and the kind of presence of it as a thing has less to do with our current situation than, all of the terrible things that we have as a civilization, especially this country has done. We're kind of really reaping what we've been sowing for the past like 200 years. So yeah. I mean, there's like, obviously 2020 being over will not mean that everything will magically get better. But it still does kind of feel like it feels good to be able to say goodbye to a time period where so much that was like bad happened in such a short amount of time. So that's,
I mean, things will definitely come to an end within the next year. Hopefully to a happier end, but and I think that's what people are looking forward to. If the changing of our arbitrarily decided year cycle is what's going to perk up people's attitudes, then I guess that's fine. But yeah, definitely.
Right. I mean,
don't allocate the responsibility to just the changing of the year.
there is obviously still like a lot to worry about. I mean, as of now, when we're recording, it still looks like the sort of transfer of power will be happening at all, which is we're holding out hope that that's gonna stay the way it is. But like, the courts have decided like, we're gonna keep the decision. We're not gonna like overturn any of these decisions. But obviously there is a long road until the 21st of January. It's more than a month, and who knows what kind of damage can happen in that time. So like, I feel like the kind of news coming out of the White House generally has been a lot quieter recently, which is weirdly cause for concern with this cabinet.
Yeah, no, definitely. I think it's like a calm before the storm. It's purely like, a lot of it is going to do with the holidays, because people are just going to be out of the office during the holidays. But I feel like January is when things are going to be extremely
January
wild.
will be very turbulent, to say the least, and I'm not 100% looking forward to it. But obviously, hopefully with the kind of transfer of power, we at least have some amount of doing anything about our current predicament in relation to the global pandemic that is killing all of us, right? So that would be one thing. Obviously, we have kind of vaccines in the work, and it's like the vaccine was developed like surprisingly quickly, and obviously people have some reservations about that. But apparently, the very like sad truth about it is that the reason it was able to be developed so quickly, at least the early testing stages, was because the United States is such a hotbed for people who are infected with the virus.
Right, like they were able to study it more because there were so many active samples that they could draw
Like
from.
that truly is just oof. I mean, that really kind of lays bare the sort of foundation of our country, doesn't it?
Mm-hmm.
But like, I mean, there are still things to worry about. Obviously, in regards to everybody knew that the winter holidays would be rough because like it's traditionally when people get sick and spread sickness because they're indoors all the time, and like we're definitely going to see another like 2-week spike after the holiday season because people just want to kill grandma, I guess.
Stop.
People just want to kill grandma. It's
Grandma.
a liberal hoax.
Grandma,
Renu.
no.
That's what they say. Ugh, yikes. Anyway, but I mean, hopefully after that we can start to do anything at all, and hopefully things will get at least somewhat better. I know that here in California we have started sheltering in place again because the numbers were going up again, and some counties actually took it upon themselves to start sheltering early, which is nice. I mean, it's nice to live in a place that takes like on a sort of governmental level that takes those kinds of things seriously, but like obviously the same cannot necessarily be said about the rest of the country, which is it's like at a certain point you just have to feel bad for the people that live in places where like your governors just aren't really doing anything and your mayors aren't really doing anything. It's like, yikes, what do you even do at that point other than just try to keep yourself safe? Like there's really nothing you can do about it.
Yeah, I mean that is what you do about it, is you just try to keep yourself safe.
Yeah,
I say as
like,
someone who may or may not be in that situation.
and obviously like this kind of is also one of those things where if you had a like if you really had what capitalism said that it was on the tin, where it was like about maximizing kind of profits and cost benefit analysis, and like making sure you get the most like benefit for what you're inputting, like we probably would have all been sheltered a long time ago, and we would have gotten money for staying home because like we're losing so much more money, and like obviously money is not like the end all be all because like people are dying, but like we're losing so much money because of the way that we're handling this, and it really just goes to show you that they don't actually even necessarily care about the economy necessarily. They just want to make more money for themselves. Like it is absolutely, in my opinion, unforgivably criminal how much money like the world's billionaires have made in the time that the rest of us have like been dying.
Yeah.
Like if your net worth is increasing by billions while the rest of us are here choosing I don't know, between like rent and food, and we're probably going to get evicted after the moratoriums are lifted, like it's really just unforgivable. Like do something, please. Like you are one of the few people in the very world that has the power to do something, and you've chosen not to do anything with it, is the most depressing thing to think about. Happy holidays, everybody. There's a depressing thought for you. Anyway, rant aside, I mean, obviously, like, it's worth spending a little bit of time reminiscing about the year, because, like, it has been quite an interesting and unique one. And this is our end of the year episode, and it's very wild to think about the fact that we've been doing this for like 3 some odd years now. Like we're, by the time this episode comes out, it will have been like 3 years, but like we have gone through quite a bit this This podcast was kind of born at the sort of beginning of the very turbulent 4 years that we've had with our current with our current president, and we're glad that you've been sticking with us, and that we can provide you some modicum of entertainment while I like rant about everything that is wrong with the world.
Capitalism.
It's capitalism, and everybody knows it. Even Evangelion knows it. Yeah. It's been a very weird year, like just in general. Obviously because of the fact that everybody was inside, but it's also like been a super turbulent year for content creators, just kind of in general. There was a large sort of exodus of content creators for things that were previously swept under the rug, kind of following the wave of like the Me Too movement, where people were coming out and talking about like how, X content creator was abusing their power and their outreach to like prey on, young people, right?
Yeah.
And there were like a lot of stories like that came out, and obviously there was the whole thing where, a couple of weeks, months into shelter and quarantine, the Bon Appetit YouTube channel exploded because they didn't want to stop doing the racism. Which is like kind of a shame too, because that was like one of the few things that was like genuinely delightful
right
during such a difficult time. Although I will say, if you are interested, Sola El Whaley has a couple of gigs, but her kind of primary place on the internet right now is she is working with the YouTuber Binging with Babish to kind of have her own show where she can really kind of flex the full range of her talents, which is very cool to see. And we're pretty much assured that she's getting like fair compensation, and we're trusting it because we probably think that she would not have taken that job otherwise. And you have Claire just started her own YouTube channel, or at the very least she started uploading to her own YouTube channel. She's going through her like recipe book, her like cookbook, and making recipes from that book. It's Claire Saffitz X Dessert Person, I believe. And that's been nice too, because like you miss Claire,
yeah,
like everybody misses Claire. And now that you don't have to support like Bon Appetit as a structure, not that I like necessarily would begrudge anybody who does, because obviously they have a new cast, and many of those people are people of color who really need that spotlight. But like just knowing kind of how the sausage is made has like really turned a lot of people off. And it has kind of revealed to people that like what was good about Bon Appetit in the first place was just how likable and unique and irreplaceable the people were. Like this is ultimately the thing that gets me about the new Bon Appetit kind of test kitchen project, I guess you could call it, is that it superficially attempts to address some of the problems that people had with it, but in a way where they're not willing to make any structural change whatsoever. Because like at the end of the day, what they essentially did was I believe Gabby also has her own channel now. I don't think she's working at Bon Appetit anymore. If I can track that down, I'll link it to in the podcast description. But like that, right? But also the fact that what they essentially did when faced with that criticism was they just brought new people on, which shows like the exact mentality that like people were basically like saying like, hey, this sucks, right? Where literally if your solution is I'm just going to replace the cast with a new cast of quirky, likable people, then you've completely missed the point, right?
Yeah.
And like it's like a thing where a lot of YouTube content nowadays, YouTube content has changed actually a lot in as a result of kind of the algorithm changes that they've done, but also how we've progressed as a society that consumes culture on the internet, where it used to be the things that got the most eyes on YouTube were like short clips and memes and things that you could like really easily pass around. And to some extent, like those things are still popular, but that doesn't lead to viewer retention. What leads to viewer retention is very personality driven.
Yes.
And so that kind of stuff is very, very important for I don't know, say you're like quirky YouTube cooking channel like slice of life thing, right? And it's kind of sad because like it really does show you what goes on in the workplace, right? It's like the myth of the happy workplace where ultimately, ultimately we are all under the boot heel of capitalism, and we more often than not have jobs not because we like what we do, but because we have no choice but to have jobs.
Right. Yeah, the whole like replacing of the workforce, I guess, for Bon Appetit and the way that it's chosen to move forward it doesn't surprise me at all, because I've even seen it with places that I've worked at, is when there's some kind of mass exodus of employees due to some mismanagement by the company, they bring in more people because they have to continue they have to continue making that revenue happen.
Right.
Rather than actually address what happens. And if they're forced to, which they'll usually give like some kind of company address or whatever, it will be in such a way that they don't apologize for anything that they did.
Right. And it's like even more egregious in the case of Bon Appetit too, because the problem in the first place was the fact that the people of color felt so disposable because they weren't being paid the same as like their white counterparts. And it's like, then you've done the exact problem that people were saying that you... Okay, all right.
Right.
I see what this is.
Yeah, and it's further propagated by the fact that a lot of companies, at least within the United States, employees are forbidden from talking about their wages with their coworkers.
Yeah, well, that's a big thing. A lot of people, like even people that I like kind of would expect to know otherwise, are very reticent about talking about their income, because they kind of, it's socially viewed in the United States at least as kind of a not like socially appropriate thing to do, which is, I mean, definitely something that like some executive somewhere was like, hey, can we make this happen? Because like if people talk about their wages, they'll know that they're being shorted, right?
Exactly.
So like, it's one of those things where I would absolutely encourage people to be more open to talking about how much
for sure.
they make. Because
like,
you're
people
not
are really
like,
go ahead.
Yeah, like, well, I was just gonna say, you're not gonna know if you're being cheated or if someone around you is being cheated unless you talk to each other. Right?
It has a weird societal effect in this country where it feels like if you talk about your wage and it happens to be higher or lower than your coworker who does the same job as you take that personally and think that, oh, well, that person somehow just better than me, or like, what's the deal here? You end up blaming yourself, blaming your coworker rather than blaming the management, and that shouldn't be the case at all.
I mean, it's really the sort of like logical inconsistency that permeates the rest of the country, where in every respect, and like the United States is kind of like uniquely really terrible about this, and I suspect that a lot of it comes from kind of the lingering ghost of the Protestant work ethic, which we kind of still see today, where like, I mean, really, the Protestants just kind of ruined everything for everyone, huh?
Wow.
Like, am I right? Well, like,
wow.
the thing about it is that like the Protestant work ethic is so toxic and so destructive, but it's so fundamental to the basis of our societal psychology, where if you have like a mental illness and you can't work all the time, you feel like that's because you're lazy and bad. Everything that happens is not the fault of society. It is the fault of your personal moral failing, which is the kind of like core of the Protestant work ethic. It has been since moved to more of a secular idea, but it has evolved rather than going away like it should have a long fucking time ago. Because like realistically speaking, like, you're not in competition. You shouldn't have to be in competition with your fellow workers. You should be working together because that's how things get done. But that's not how companies, and that's not how our society treats people. They say, look at this, that person, like, it's like that image of this like guy with like a plate full of cookies, and like one guy has one cookie and the other guy's like looking at the plate of cookies and he's just like, look, that guy wants to take your cookie, right? It's like the country is so hostile towards worker solidarity because it so heavily encourages competition and personal improvement to the detriment of worker solidarity and real meaningful relationships. And it's like so terrible and toxic and destructive. It's like, if you don't work hard enough, you're never gonna make it. It's like, well, like, I don't know, maybe as like human beings we shouldn't have to work to have places to live, because we have enough places to live actually, and we're still building more. We've just chosen not to give people places to live because we don't think they deserve them. And it's like such a bad mentality to have in regards to your fellow human being,
right?
Like, that's the way it works.
Like, places are intentionally built to drive out other people who might already live there because you don't want those kinds of people there.
And that's like that's like the most egregious thing, isn't it? Like, gentrification is like so egregious because people already are living there, and you've decided, you know what? I don't want these people living here. I want better, quote unquote, people to live there. And it's like, all right, get stuffed. Get stuffed. It's I don't know. Always the holiday season, and I mean, I know I'm like this all the time, but like always the holiday season puts me more into this mood where I'm just like so upset about everything that like happens. That is, by all rights, technically outside of my personal control, and like even that framing is like so like centered around the idea that one person matters so much, where like sure, one person does matter in the context of a lot of things, a human life is sort of nothing to disregard lightly, or regard lightly rather, but when you have the idea that climate change, the sort of coming existential threat to humanity, you're like, well, what can I do to do better? And like, there isn't really a lot that you personally can do. You can do as much as you want to like reduce your own carbon footprint. But even if you are like, carbon neutral, or even like, negative or whatever, it takes a much larger scale of action. Like I think top 10% of the wealth owners in the world contribute to something like 50% of the carbon emissions. So like, there's nothing that you can really do. I mean, obviously that doesn't mean you shouldn't do things that are better, right? You should strive to live as good a life for the people around you and the future generations as possible. But like, at a certain point, the only thing you can really do is band together with your fellow people to eat the oil-owning class.
There has to be some kind of systemic change, essentially,
right, exactly,
in order to impact a big enough change.
And it's like so frustrating because that's not the way that your psychology, if you've kind of grown up in the United States, or even in some kind of other most other countries, I'll say, but like, if you grow up in the United States, it's uniquely suited to that mentality where you're like, well, one person matters so much, my individuality matters so much, like, I have to be able to do something. And when you get told, no, you can't do anything by yourself, you have no recourse. You have nothing else that you can turn to, because the entire fabric of society has been built so that the connections you have with other people are invisible.
Right.
And I don't know. That's a pretty good segue into Evangelion, I would say.
Let's get in there.
Let's get in there so that we're not here for 4 hours, because we planned to do both movies, both rebuild movies, both of the latter two rather. So like 2.22 and 3.33.
Yes.
If there's any confusion around the naming scheme, it's 2.0 was the theater release, 2.22 was the Blu-ray release. Likewise for 3.0 and 3.33. I have no idea if they added or changed any scenes, but I mean, it's Anno, so probably.
Oh no.
But anyway,
I watched 2.0.
I watched 2.22 because that's what I found on my computer hard drive.
Well, we're gonna have if we talk about something that the other hasn't seen, then we'll know why.
Yeah. But anyway, like the we wanted to talk about that, but like halfway through watching 2.22, I was like, oh no. This episode will run for far too long, because I know I have a lot to say about 2.22, and I know Renu's gonna have a lot to say about 3.33.
Yeah. I was really surprised because last time we talked, you were like, well, I don't know how much I have more to say about Ava, but here we are.
Here we are, and I've written like a page and a half single-spaced of notes.
Ava draws it out of us, I guess.
Yeah, I really am surprised, like, kind of every time I watch Ava, like, how much more I get out of it. And it's one of those things where, like, I as a person am uniquely not very good at going back and watching, like, old media.
Sure.
I have a hard time with it, but I think Ava is one of those things where I can come back and watch it, because I think it is one of those shows that is, like, so complicated that the more you grow and experience, the kind of more things you can bring and the more ways you can interpret it. And like, obviously, you know, when you have a near apocalyptic event that forces everybody to stay inside all the time, like, it really does make Eva take on kind of a new sort of meaning. But yeah, I mean, let's get right into it. So, like, Evangelion 2.22, you cannot advance, not being, of course, in parentheses, is not directed by Hideki Anno, or not chiefly directed, but it is written by him.
Yeah, it is written by him, yeah.
It is chiefly directed by Kazuya Tsurumaki, who I don't recognize the name, but I'm sure he's probably done something.
He's like an old hand in Gainax and
yeah, I bet. But it's very it kind of takes the like latter half of the Evangelion series and just really, really hard compresses it into about 2 hours.
Yeah.
It is such a different experience than watching the series, and I mean it's been quite a while since I've watched 2.22, so I had to obviously rewatch it the other day, and it has been quite some time since I have watched this series as well. I don't remember the last time I did. I think I watched like a couple episodes the first time when it like launched on Netflix. That was the last time I rewatched any Evangelion. But the pacing of it is like very different.
Yes.
I'm not gonna say it's better or worse. Obviously, it's formatted for a movie, and I have a lot of feelings about series to movie recap adaptations, but Evangelion rebuilds kind of occupy a very unique place because there's so much content added to, whereas 1.0 I think is mostly just recap of the first, like, you know, some odd episodes. I don't actually remember when it, like, what episode it like kind of cuts off at, but like the 2.0 onwards has a lot of deviations from the original series, and so I think it works because it is both adapted for film, and I mean that in the way of it is hard adapted, right? And it isn't just retelling the series, because I think it would be a lot weaker if it did. I think 1.0 was fine. I think it was paced well, and it covers as much as it needs to cover. And I think 2.0 recognizes that you can't fit the rest of the Evangelion series, and really just kind of hard condenses it into a lot of the more tense kind of scene. Because like the structure of the rebuild is Johaku, which is like a traditional Japanese kind of stage rhythm where you have like the beginning, you have the rising action, and then you have the climax. So 2.0 is the rising action. There are a lot of very intense scenes that happen, but a lot of 2.0 actually is very mundane, actually. It focuses a lot around kind of the daily life of Shinji and being introduced to Asuka and, you know, hanging out with his friends and whatnot. You see a lot more of the daily life of Tokyo 3, as opposed, it is Tokyo 3, right? I'm not just like pulling that out. Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
But it's you see a lot more of the kind of mundane day-to-day activity than you ever did in the series, because the series is very, like, aside from the school, very empty and kind of devoid of ancillary life. whereas 2.0 really makes a point of fleshing that out and showing you what it's like, which I think is interesting. There's like a tidbit about like how they can't really justify like meat anymore, so they have to like grow the cell meat, like, and it's like, oh hey, we're doing that now.
Uh-huh.
Yeah. And it's very interesting because like it really has that, but there are also like some of them, I think, most intense scenes actually in the entire set of movies. Like, I mean, the Unit 03 kind of stuff has always been really intense, but they like jacked it up to like 25 in the rebuild, because it's like, well, first Shinji has to kill like his friend Toji, and in the rebuilds they're like, all right, you are not able to do anything, and your body is choking Asuka to death. And it's actually, I think, even more so because of the fact that, you know, Asuka is in Unit 03 because she's had Unit 02 taken from her, basically, by Mari.
She's really vulnerable right now in this moment.
Like, she's been stripped of her agency, of the way that she can, you know, connect to the world, and then put into a different body that doesn't suit her. And immediately it rejects her. And then Shinji comes and he's just like, but wait, I don't want to do this. And he is forced to enact violence upon her. And it is, I mean, the scene in the original series is obviously like very distressing and very chilling, but like when it's like animated and it lingers for like so long, and like you just see like how much like Shinji hates this, you're like, oh no, this is so much. It does a really good job, I think, of driving home just how intense that scene is, because it's still, I think, one of the most horrifying scenes in the entire set of movies. And you have that, you obviously have, you know, Rei being eaten, and then Shinji trying to save her, inadvertently causing third impact to happen at the very end of the movie. It's, I think 2.22 works very well as a story, as a tightly written story. Formatted for a movie, it works really well, and I think it's because it is not quite the middle child, but kind of, because technically it is a, I think the term is a tetralogy, but like there's 4 movies, right? Technically, so it doesn't necessarily suffer from the like sagging middle that, like, you know, Lord of the Rings suffers from. But because I think the second movie really does a lot to build the action, and like actually heighten the tension of everything that happens, because it really grounds all the characters. It gives them stakes and shows, like, you know, what the world looks like, and why like people have some amount of care for it. And I think that's always interesting. And this is something that I find that Japanese, like, anime specifically, is really good at. I find that, I don't know why, but anime is really, really good at utilizing like I guess you could say like plot essential, quote unquote, even though, you know, it is, content to enhance the I would say Japanese media in general, actually, now that I think about it, to enhance the kind of emotional impact of the more serious scenes. Like, you get this a lot with Yakuza, the Yakuza series, which I've been playing through recently, where because so much of the Yakuza is like these like really silly side games and mini games, and like your main characters are clearly, you know, people who have lived through lifetimes of trauma, and they have a lot of baggage and expectations, and they're held in place and shackled by their kind of place in society. You also spend a lot of time humanizing those characters, because they're like really silly in side quests. All the side quests are like ridiculous. You get to kind of know the people of Kamurocho and Sotenbori. There's an entire kind of like sub quest line where Kiryu gets really into racing pocket cars, and it's a thing that like he's just really into. And it's like honestly, it's probably the thing that makes him happiest in the world. And then like then you can kind of bring that meaning forward into like things that aren't as silly, right? Because if you look at Kiryu and you see him being really happy about like racing like these little mini pocket cars, you're like, oh, that's kind of funny and silly, like look at how happy he is. And then you like kind of have the realization where you're like, wait, it's probably because he was like deprived of a normal child. Oh fuck. Anyway.
Yep.
Yeah. Go on.
Yeah, I would tend to agree, and they do that. They execute that really well in this movie too, because you have the whole the classmate dynamic between Rei, Shinji, and now Asuka, and there's a bit of jealousy working in there as well. When Asuka observes Shinji's relationship with Rei and how they've, they had the context of 1.0 to bring them together, but Asuka's the new element, and so she kind of storms in, and everything's not about her, and she's upset about that. But yeah, I think as like storytelling overall, I do really enjoy 2.0. It definitely is not a skippable movie if you're gonna go through Evangelion. I would say like probably one of the strongest elements for me in 2.0 was the way that they explored Shinji and Gendo's relationship. Because their entire dynamic, like it permeates the whole show, obviously, but it really gets brought to the forefront in this episode, this movie. Because they start off the movie, I mean, aside from the introduction of Mari, with them visiting Yui's grave together, and that's such a key moment, I feel, and really deeply personal to the both of them.
Right.
And it's super awkward between them. And then you have Rei, who her entire existence is spawned from Yui's, trying to bring them together, like maybe Yui would have done if she were still there.
Yeah.
And Gendo, like, he thinks about like how Yui told him to take care of Shinji, and then Shinji is confessing to Asuka how the reason he's piloting is because he wants his dad to be proud of him and to recognize him. And then Unit 03 happens.
Yeah. I mean, I'll say that I think I really did enjoy that they decided to flesh out kind of Shinji and Gendo's relationship a lot more.
Yeah.
Because like obviously Gendo Ikari is still the worst anime dad probably.
Dude.
But like at least now you have a little bit more context for how terrible he is.
Like the line, like when they were at the grave, he mentioned something about how his memories of Yui are kept in his heart. And I was like, bro, he has a heart. And I laughed.
Right, exactly. Yeah, I mean, like the thing about it is that when you humanize a character like Gendo Ikari, what you do is you take and I think this is very interesting actually when you look at the kind of progression of Gendo and the different iterations of him, where before in the series, like you see like a moment or two where like he obviously does care about something or someone, right?
Of
like
course,
he hurts himself in order to get Rei out of the pod, but like we have a couple more scenes like that where that it really like kind of humanizes and grounds him and gives him a lot more of a basis. And what that does is it really kind of drives home exactly what he's doing and why, and gives it a lot more impact. Because before, when he's like just kind of mysterious shadow government dad figure that like you don't know that much about, other than like he probably has an emotion, like you see him kind of go through the range of emotions, and you see that like a lot of what he's doing is like hardening his own heart to do what he feels like must be done, even though like other people might not necessarily agree that that's like the best thing to do.
Right.
I think that Yeah, I think that the one thing I will say about 2.22 is there is one character that uniquely suffers from the shortening of the series, and I'll say that's Asuka. I think Asuka does not get nearly as much development in 2.22 as the comparable episodes in the series, because it's and I think part of this is they don't necessarily have to. Like, if you only watch the rebuild, I think you would find Asuka to be a much weaker character than she is, because a lot of her character traits are told very kind of casually or subtly or in passing or subtextually, whereas in the series it's a lot more overt. Like, you get to see like all of her kind of trauma surrounding her parents and her kind of sordid attraction to Kaji, and like you get a lot more of that stuff. Asuka's a much more like well-rounded character, whereas in 2.22 she is still all of those things, but you don't see them on screen. They're kind of hinted at you through interactions with characters, which I wouldn't say is like necessarily bad, but like a lot of the kind of direct trauma that leads to her being a pilot is screen time that is actually kind of usurped to share with Mari. I will say we're gonna put a pin in Mari because I have a lot of feelings about Mari, but I think the rebuild is one of those like funny things where it works specifically because Evangelion the series exists for you to watch and get that basis for Asuka as a character and why she does what she does. Because you get a lot of Shinji, you get a lot of Gendo, and you actually even get like a lot of Rei in 2.22. Yeah. The one person you don't really get as much of is Asuka, and that's I think part of why they put her in Unit 03 this time around. It's because it's to make up for the fact that like you really need to kind of ramp up that emotional intensity and like those character arcs for the different pilots. And that's not to say that they like skimp on her character, because I don't think that's true. I think they tell a lot about her character very subtly, because there is a conversation that she has with Rei where Rei doesn't eat meat, presumably because she kind of knows that she's like a fabricated human and kind of doesn't feel the need to be alive. Realistically speaking, she is alive kind of purely as a biological process, not really being alive as a person. And she doesn't feel like she deserves to be alive, right? Because she's basically just like, UE2 electric boogaloo. And so as a result, she like you can kind of see Rei as not a doll like Asuka calls her, but as a very like passive subject, as somebody who does not feel like they deserve things, so they don't go out and like do things, and they don't do things like she doesn't eat meat specifically because she doesn't feel like she has the right to kind of consume other living creatures. Whereas Asuka, as somebody who fights so strongly to establish herself and her independence and her being alivedness, very specifically kind of like calls her out and says like, living things eat other living things to continue to live. And I think that's such a great interaction because it's a very, very brief interaction, and it shows you like, one, Rei is a character that she kind of feels like she doesn't deserve to be alive because she's like a fabricated human. And in actuality, she probably technically doesn't have a soul. I mean, that's a little bit like complicated because Yui's soul is in Unit 01. But like the idea of a body without a soul acquiring humanity throughout the course of the movie, I think is something that obviously the original series explores, but is very explicit in 2.22 that I think is very interesting. And obviously on the other hand, you have Asuka, who fights so strongly to establish herself as a living creature that is like separate from everyone else. She's trying to be a pilot because it validates her as a human being. It's her purpose. It's her purpose for being alive, right? To be good at piloting an Eva. And like, so she is somebody who will kind of like eat and eat and eat and consume, but will never be satisfied, which is very interesting if you look at Unit 02 as a in comparison to like, you know, 01's kind of beast mode, where like the berserk mode for Unit 02 is like a beast mode, and it like grows teeth and eats things and like walks on all four legs, right? It's like this kind of savage, like hungering beast, because that's very reflective of how Asuka is as a person. And I think, interestingly, it's also very reflective of how Mari is. But again, we'll come back to the Mari pin.
Uh-huh.
But yeah, like I think that it's very subtle about the way that it builds Asuka's character. There are some very explicit moments, like where she's talking about like how she has to establish herself as a pilot, or else like what is the point of her being alive.
Right.
There is obviously the kind of like sequences where she is learning to maintain a relationship with Shinji as someone she has to live together with and be co-pilots with. She doesn't want him around, but she feels the need to connect to other human beings, and you see that when they like share the bed, and like, you know, when she starts like trying to cook for him, right?
Yeah. Yeah, she very profoundly acknowledges the fact that even though she's been alone most of her life, she's shocked at how she feels lonely right now, and that's when she seeks him out. And
right.
It kind of culminates in the very last conversation she has with Misato, where she says, you know, she's used to being alone and she kind of prefers it that way, but she's come to realize with her interactions with everyone else, you know, over the course of this movie, that sharing time with others isn't so bad, you know.
Right. And there's that scene with Rei in the elevator where they're talking, and you know, she's like, where Rei says like, you know, there's happiness outside of piloting and Ava, and you know, she also mentions like, you know, I can't bond with other people except for, you know, through the Ava, because again, she like kind of feels like she doesn't really deserve anything. And I think that's interesting because it's it both shows like why like the kind of motivation behind like why they pilot Avas, but it also shows like it has kind of this connection to the idea of the Evangelion as both a parental figure or an authority, and as kind of self-actualization. Like there's a very like kind of tenuous line between those two that you kind of have to tread as you kind of grow into an adolescent and an adult, where because Asuka is so defined by the validation of others, especially those in positions of authority, it's very difficult for her to see a life outside of the Ava, and where, you know, 2.22 is like Rei coming to terms with the kind of burgeoning humanity inside of her, the kind of burgeoning desire of humanity kind of growing inside her. Asuka is a lot about learning to be independent of the expectations of others, and like how to stand as kind of the tiny fragile flesh person outside of the giant meat flesh person covered in big metal plates. Right?
Yeah.
Well, because this is something that I'm always interested in, the idea of mechs as self-actualization, of like the idealized body of the armor that one puts on to challenge the world. Because in many properties, that is what it is. In Ava, it kind of is that, but it's also a very like dangerous thing, because they're subverting the idea of what a mech is, right? They have like the mech, and then inside the mech is a person, and then inside that person is another person, right? And so you have this like very distressing kind of organic, fleshy, like innard, I guess, inner world to what otherwise looks like to other people armor, a weapon, a way to tackle the world. Like underneath all of humanity's creations is ultimately like the kind of fragile and very powerful sense of being made of flesh, right?
Yeah.
Literally made of flesh in this case.
Yes.
I think I did mention that in one of the previous Evangelion episodes, but like it's very interesting how my understanding of the mechs just continues kind of to evolve as I like think more about mechs as an idea. Which is funny because like when you think about Evangelion, you kind of first think about the mechs or the Evas as like, you know, mech / not mechs, but in reality, the kind of like real weapon actually of Evangelion at its core is the AT field. So like when you really think about it, like the mechs are only a way to project your AT field into the world, right? You need the mech as a conduit to you know, generate the AT field. And you need the AT field because without an AT field, you cannot penetrate another AT field. So there's a very like interesting and also kind of like very violent idea of how like psychology and ideology works, where like the most powerful thing in the entire Evangelion universe, you know, a universe where things routinely explode, is the human like will and the human mind and the human determination to make things happen, right? It's like the pure kind of psychological manifestation of will, which you know is I think very, very interesting, obviously, right? It's because while Evangelion exists as a kind of subversion of and a deconstruction of shonen anime tropes, it still takes a lot from those tropes, and it reframes them in a way that is that shows you just how violent that idea is and just how important it is, right?
Oh, like, yeah, for sure.
The fact that like the angels have these AT fields, and the only way that you can like hurt the angel is by like literally like piercing the AT field with your own AT field, is like such a violent, invasive idea, but is like kind of core to how Evangelion understands how people connect to each other.
Yes.
It is the idea that without the ability to hurt other people and be hurt in return, like you cannot come to an understanding.
Yeah, that's the culmination of the whole shebang, the whole story, and why Shinji ends up, at least in the original series, deciding to choose against Seal's plan of absorbing everyone into one entity.
Right. I mean, it also is like the importance of having a boundary that is strong enough, right?
Yeah.
It's like if you as a person exist in society and you can generate boundaries powerful enough to repel the kind of like invasive tendencies of other people, then you can I mean, you need that to survive. And at the same time, if those boundaries are too strong, if you have boundaried yourself up to the point where nobody can reach you anymore, then you cease to be a human being, right? Where literally, like, Shinji generates an AT field so powerful, he causes the apocalypse. Like, he literally just ascends to godhood. And, oh boy, that's quite a lot, isn't it? But yeah, I mean, like, it's also like, I mean, obviously there's kind of other things I wanted to touch on about like the idea of the apocalypse, but I can put a pin in that. We can touch on it later because I think there's some other stuff I obviously like, you know, want to talk about.
Sure.
I do like that there is a scene where Misato says, "I'm not waiting for a miracle, I'm going to create one with human determination," because like it really frames the whole series in a way where like it is about the importance of like human determination, but it's framed in such a way that like it is the will of young people wishing to change and protect the world that will protect it from, you know, the sort of existential threats that threaten it, which is like, I don't know, I don't know. I just feel like that's like a little bit relevant right now.
Yeah,
in our current sort of
bit,
looming climate crisis. It's just a thought.
No, definitely. It's it's a huge thing in Eva, and it's especially demonstrated through Shinji's character and his whole shtick about not running away. Is when he does run away, nothing happens. Or in the case of 2.0, when he ran away, the world continued to slide towards disaster, but he was still told, you're young, it's okay if you want to run away, but if you're going to run away, do it right now because the city's being destroyed. And the plot doesn't exactly move forward until he makes a decision and he decides that he's going to go back and pilot the Eva.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. Let's I want to return to the topic of apocalypse, because I think so apocalypse as a thing is always kind of a very interesting idea to me. Like what does it mean to have an apocalypse?
Mm-hmm.
And it's very important because there's I don't know, 3 of them that happen in Evangelion, I think.
Yes.
Maybe more. But like it's very interesting. Second impact happens, and then the ocean is basically rendered unlivable. So like nothing lives in the ocean anymore, and the only fish that exist are in like tanks.
Yeah.
And at the same time, you kind of see, because you get so much of the kind of mundane action of Tokyo 3 in 2.22, it really like it frames it as, I mean, the apocalypse happened and we're just gonna move on, which is like kind of how it works, actually.
Yeah.
Or like something terrible will happen and then people will just adjust to it, right?
Right.
It becomes a very normal thing very, very quickly. And you can kind of see that even in the design of Tokyo 3 as a place that is it's a landscape that is built for combat, right?
Yes.
Like this is something that I like to think about, which is what is your location designed for? If you look at the design of most American cities, they're designed for cars. Some places don't even have sidewalks for people to walk on. Like the design of a lot of modern American cities, first and foremost, is so that cars can get around, not for people to walk around. Whereas if you look at a lot of like older European cities, they're made for people to walk around. You can barely fit a car on some of these these streets.
Yeah.
And in kind of the same vein, Tokyo 3 is a landscape that is built for combat. The living structures sink and retreat into the ground, and the landscape is very modular. They can just like put plates up to create paths for the Evangelions to run on.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So it is the landscape of a place that is meant for combat. It is the normalization of constant warfare, which like I don't know about you, Renu, but that just feels a little bit relevant to me as a person who lives in the United States of America, a place that's been actively at war for 19 years for seemingly no reason.
I mean, you could see it in how the civilians treat like shelter warnings and how they have to, go into hiding or whatever. They're so casual about it. They're like, okay, yeah, it's another shelter warning, whatever, no big deal. And then they just kind of try and listen to the news or whatever, or just they just hang out.
But you know that if Evangelion took place in the United States, there would be people that would be like, I don't believe in no angels. I'm going outside. Like the current sort of response to how people are handling the pandemic really kind of frames that in a very different light. Because obviously a country like Japan has remarkably low transmission rate for how big the country is. Obviously, they have done a little bit of fudging and covering things up that they shouldn't have been, but it's a very densely populated place, and it's remarkable. But it turns out just because everyone wears masks when they get sick, it's just normal there.
Yeah.
And anyway, oh god, okay, I have to pull it away. I have to pull.
Yeah.
We gotta pull back. Back to Ava. Anyway, oh boy, but yeah, it's it is very interesting to me, the idea of the apocalypse becoming normalized, and yet more apocalypses are on the horizon. They're always waiting to happen. The world could end pretty much at any point, and it does, right? And it frames what is an apocalypse in, I think, a very interesting way. Because there is the very, like, literal explosion that happens that makes the ocean unlivable. Right? But there is there's kind of also a subtextual level to the apocalypse of, it's the apocalypse as an end to the old status quo and the beginning of something new, which is what Third Impact really is. Like I'm interested in Second Impact as actually all of the impacts basically are the impacts of the violence of divinity. Because, like, when Gendo and, oh god, I'm blanking on the other guy's name, the old guy.
Fuyutsuki?
Fuyutsuki, yes. I remember I really liked his name, I just don't remember it. Are, like, flying over the crater of Second Impact.
Yeah.
They're, like, having a conversation about it where they're like, it is it's an area cleansed of the original sin of humanity, and Fuyutsuki kind of, like, remarks, like, I prefer the chaos of being human, and Gendo's like, being human is actually like it's actually a harmony, that, like, the line between chaos and harmony is so, like, murky. And I think that's interesting because it really reminds me a lot of Devilman Crybaby, the end of Devilman Crybaby, where, like, the angels just nuke the planet. And it shows you, like, all of these, like, geometric shaped explosions where certainly mass death is happening. And it's like, this is the perfect precision of divinity, the perfect precise violence of divinity. And Evangelion has a very similar approach to it. I mean, even in the angel design, you can see it, where, like, a lot of them are these, like, very hard geometric shapes. Like, they are angels, and those angels are defined by perfection. And, it is interesting that as the series kind of goes on, as the movies kind of continue and the plot continues, the angels become more and more organic to the point of, like, very, like, sort of uncanny. And, like, I don't know, that stuff is always very interesting to me. I am super into the idea of, like, what is divinity really, except for, like, the mandate of violence. which is like such a, I think it's such a, like, uniquely non-Western thing. Like, I'm not gonna say it's a uniquely Japanese thing, but it's a very uniquely, like, non-Western idea where I think because the sort of framing of Christianity is more about, like, mercy, and at least on the surface about, like, mercy, even though people did, like, a lot of killing in the name of Jesus. But, like, when you live on the other side of that, and you also kind of have your own mythologies that have a lot of violence in them, which is funny because, like, Evangelion is based on like biblical mythology, and really, if you think about it, God does a lot of killing. God does a lot of killing. But, like, there is a very, like, indiscriminate violence to the idea of divinity that is very different from the very, like, pointed and murky and messy and chaotic violence that humans inflict upon each other on kind of a daily basis. Like, Hideaki Anno basically made an anime series where he was like, being alive is violence. How do you feel about that?
He sure did.
he sure did. But, like, anyway, back to my point. So in kind of non-Western context, the idea of Western divinity as violence, as, like, violence backed by power, like state power, is very poignant, I'll say. Like, there is a reason why if you see a church in a JRPG, they are almost certainly the bad guys. It's almost like when you try to proselytize to an entire country like 4 or 5 times, people get a little upset about it. Turns out when you do it at gunpoint, people get a little upset about it.
It's funny that you say that because I want to say, like, in the past couple months I've been replaying through the original Shining Force, and in Shining Force the save point and the place where you eventually, like, get to promote all your dudes to higher classes is at the church. But then there's one point in the game where the church gets sacked and is completely replaced by like evil monster demon guys, and they're all pretending to be, you know, members of the church and stuff like that, and then they ambush you in the church.
Right. The one place you thought you were safe.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it's this is like very much a thing with like Fire Emblem. Obviously the latest one had a very complicated relationship to religion and the church, and I think one that it did not necessarily handle that well. But complaints aside, about that, like, yeah, a lot of Japanese media properties, church bad guys, Hellsing church bad guys, Fire Emblem church bad guys. Let's see, what else? I don't know, like Dragon Quest church bad guys, probably.
What? Don't you get revived back at the church?
I mean, probably, yeah.
Like your coffin gets carried back to the church, and then you come back.
Right. Although Dragon Quest is very kind of unique in its very like Western roots, which is interesting. But yeah, like it's you know, church bad guy. That's all I'm saying. Institutionalized religion is the problem. There is one thing I did want to say, which is in regards to the church. I find it very, I find it very funny that the non, I guess you could call it a non-aggression pact, right? The non-aggression pact, the Vatican Treaty, as it's called.
Oh yeah,
yeah. I find that to be hysterical, right? Because it's very like, okay. So there are a lot of like really complicated kind of historical factors at play here. One, the idea of the Vatican as kind of this like place where all of the countries, the remaining countries in the world will like, you know, come to talk about their military non-aggression to each other, right?
Right.
Two, there is like this idea of Evangelions as weapons of war, because they're fighting a war against angels, but presumably also because they think that the Evas could fight each other, which, you know, happens at the end of Evangelion, where, you know, Asuka's fighting the like mass-produced Evas, that kind of stuff, where definitely that's a thing, right? But also I find it funny because the one remark that I believe Misato makes about it is that the Vatican Treaty is about the egos of countries. And that line really strikes me because, like, obviously, you know, Evangelion, as we've discussed before, has a lot of like strong basis in Jungian psychology, like Freudian Jungian psychology. And so when you talk about the ego in that context, you can't like not think about like, you know, the ego. And I'm pretty sure that in the Japanese version of the dub, like she says like ego, like ego. So it's kind of about the like base impulse desires of the varying countries, but also about their kind of pride as national entities.
Right. Yep.
And this is a very like complicated historical basis because Japan is not allowed to have a standing army. They have a self-defense force, which is what they call their non-standing army.
Yeah.
But following World War II, Japan was not like signed a treaty, and they're not allowed to have a standing army, which is something that hardline nationalists get very upset about in Japan to this very day. They're always pushing to like make it so that they can have a standing army again, which is like, you have that self-defense force. It's basically a standing army.
It's just not called an army.
Well, no, it just means that they're not allowed to use it to aggress upon other countries, which I feel like all armies really realistically should be.
Yeah, right, exactly.
Right, we shouldn't have armies anymore. We should just have self-defense forces.
Right.
Which isn't to absolve the Japanese self-defense force of any of its sins, because I'm sure you can find many wrongdoings inside any kind of military apparatus. But like, that's kind of the thing, right? Where you have a piece of media about how you can only have so many weapons, and it's a piece of media from a country where you're not allowed to have a standing army, and you're presumably not allowed to have like nuclear weapons of any kind. I actually don't know. I don't know about that specific aspect of it. That might not be true. But like, woof, huh?
Sure.
And also like I think there is some kind of like Japan as a like first and a half world country kind of idea where all of the really big powers like, you know, the United States and Russia and Germany are like kind of doing with Japan whatever the hell they want. They're like, here, take this Ava. All right, now take this one, but you can't use that one anymore, right? They're kind of at the whim. And like this is interesting because like Ano is like very interested in the kind of like minute bureaucracy of national entities. And because like if you watch like Shin Godzilla, like it's extremely
everything
about bureaucracy, right? So you kind of have this like this tension on a governmental level between countries, even though realistically speaking, right? It like all of the angels are existential threats to all of humanity,
right? Exactly.
We're still as people unable to band together without the structure of government, and so we have to go through the layers of bureaucracy. In a way, it's like kind of the idea of we have to navigate, you know, society, even though like we realistically should just be working with each other all the time, and it doesn't necessarily have to go through this much to say like we should work together, because if we don't, it'll be a problem for literally all of us.
Yeah, no, I actually quite enjoy that about Ano's takes on these kinds of apocalyptic events, is that no matter what, bureaucracy is going to be your largest obstacle.
Right, exactly. The real enemy was bureaucracy. I mean, that really is it though, right? Like, it's like even despite all of the angels, the real threat to humanity is humanity itself.
Yeah, and it was the same in Shin Gojira, where they had to work around all these bureaucratic, so much nonsense. They couldn't just send out their, like, largest nukes or whatever. They had to get approval at each level, and yada yada yada, and then logistics and such, and, yeah. So I feel like, I guess in regards to the whole bureaucracy thing, I like how Ano executes it, because I feel like in other series, you would either have the shonen approach where you skip all of that and you immediately throw all your giant robots, everything that you have at the enemy or the impending threat. Or B, you get into the bureaucracy stuff and it's really boring or it's really badly executed and doesn't make sense.
Right.
And at least with Ano, the bureaucracy still feels dumb in that way that it's a really dumb obstacle that people have to, you know, navigate. But the characters themselves also address how dumb it is.
Yeah. I mean, that's kind of like the thing about bureaucracy, right? Where it is something that we invented as a species to facilitate the process of enacting change. But it turns out that people are afraid of change and would rather use the bureaucracy to control people. And so you have a situation where the bureaucracy does not serve the people serve the bureaucracy, which is like, I mean really when I think about it, really when I think about it, like it's a very like Kafka-esque thing, which is funny because Kafka is very big in Japan. For reasons I think I must have articulated on the podcast before. There's no way that I haven't.
You probably have.
I probably even talked about it in relation to Evangelion. I like honestly probably should go back and listen to like the old episodes to like remember what I talked about. But like, yeah. It's interesting because like the bureaucracy kind of happens off screen, but like characters remark upon it, and like it's just one of the many ways in which Evangelion shows you a world that is it's showing you the world of adults, but in a way where it shows you that adults are subject to the world of adults, and
yes
they have to live in a society where it is very difficult to like do things even if it is the best thing for all of humanity, right?
Yeah.
So like you have this world that is out of the control of pretty much everybody, except for like Seal, who are like the real like shadow masterminds behind all of civilization or whatever, right? And so you kind of set up this very interesting thing where you have this generation of very like young kids who are subject to the whims of the adults around them, and then you find out that those adults are subject to the whims of the adults around them.
Yes. It just keeps going.
And on the topic of Seal 2, I think it's very interesting that there is a basically a giant civilization-wide shadow government that created Second Impact, which is I can't put my I can't quite place it. I can't put my finger on it.
Right.
But I feel like a mega powerful shadowy cabal of people who control many aspects of the world, causing the apocalypse to happen is I don't know, it just seems a little familiar. I can't place why though.
It feels kind of on the nose.
Feels a little bit on the nose.
Yeah.
Feels a little bit on the nose. It is it's very interesting to me that like the idea of Evangelions and AT Fields as the kind of last line between the angels destructing all of humanity and, you know, that not happening is, as I said before, because the AT Fields and the Evas are basically a way for these kids to manifest the power of will, right, of human determination, right? It's like they have to fix all of the, and I mentioned this before, definitely in a previous episode about Evangelion. The kids are forced to. They're saddled with the responsibility of fixing the problems that the adults before them could not, because they're the only ones that can generate AT fields. They're the only ones who can manifest the willpower and the kind of like imagination to dream of a better world and to create it and to manifest that, right? They're the only ones with the strength to manifest it, because other people can't generate AT fields.
Yeah.
Right. And it's also just like none of these kids are like well adjusted either, right? Like they can all generate AT fields because they're really messed up kids.
Right.
Like they all got hyper trauma up in there.
Yeah.
And I mean there might be something there to the idea that it takes broken people to fix the world. But I have not developed that idea yet. So I don't know. I'm just gonna put that out there and just kind of like I'm gonna float it out there.
Yeah. Well, I think it's relevant to them, especially because they're all kids who have, at least in the beginning of the story, a lot of trouble connecting with other people. They're each alone for their own separate reasons, and part of generating an AT field is to keep other people out, and so that's probably one of the reasons why they're so good at it.
Yeah. I mean, I guess like when I really think about it, right? The idea of the AT field as a defense mechanism is very interesting. The idea that they can only generate them because of the conditions that they've been brought up in, and at the same time, what they're trying to do is to create a world where people don't have to have that, which is not that different from what the Human Instrumentality Project is, but at the same time is, because it's not just about turning everybody into human soup. I mean, on a metaphorical level, like it is different, right?
Right.
And on a physical level, like they're different things, but like the kids basically are forced to react to the world around them and interact with the world in the way that they were taught to interact with the world, which in many cases is in very destructive ways. Because like none of these kids are well adjusted. You have Shinji, who just like has like the hedgehog's dilemma. He like really can't become close to other people.
Right.
You have Asuka, who feels like she has to handle everything alone. You have Rei, who has to grapple with the fact that she might not be real and might not exist outside of the ability to pilot an Eva. And I think most interestingly, you have the other two children, right? You have Kaoru, who is and you're gonna have to correct me if my like overall Evangelion knowledge is wrong, because like it gets really muddled sometimes, and they change it between iterations sometimes. But like he's like an angel, right?
Yes, I mean it's confirmed in 3.0 that he is
that's what
an
I thought.
angel.
That's what I thought. Yeah. So like
yeah.
So like you have Kaoru as an angel that is like attempting to manifest the same kind of energy as the kids, right?
Yes.
It's a very interesting idea of angels as these like perfect, divine, destructive beings that will bring about the end of old humanity and usher in a new age of pretty much like, you know, just the angels, right? And you have Kaoru, whose explicit goal is kind of the opposite of that, where like, you know, he takes on a human form and grows very close to Shinji, and essentially is like it's funny because like Kaoru is basically like Shinji's like manic pixie dream boy.
He sure is.
Right? Like he's kind of there to fix Shinji, which is interesting. Anyway, but I mean Kaoru is an angel, so he can produce an AT field. And then you have Mari, who Mari is a lot. Like, let's talk about Mari now, right?
All right, let's get into the Mari discussion.
So, Mari Makinami was created for I think she was actually created for the PS2 games or something.
Oh, really?
Or something weird like that. But they put her into the movies, and the only thing Anno like had in mind when he was putting Mari in the movies was, I want her to break Evangelion. Literally, he had no other ideas other than, I want her to break Evangelion, which is very interesting because like, so Anno has a very complicated relationship to Evangelion as a concept.
Sure.
In many ways, it feels like Anno created something that was an indictment of the people who watched it, right? It was very much, and especially if you watch like End of Evangelion, the very like last kind of lingering scene of just like the crowd in the movie, right? Like Anno created Evangelion, and it was basically a finger pointing at otaku culture and just being like, you sickos, what are you doing, right? Like, he created all these characters that people were very into archetypically, and then he gave them depth that made it very uncomfortable to be attached to those characters. Not that didn't stop people eventually. Like, people normalize anything, right?
Yeah.
But like one has to understand that in the context of when Evangelion came out, that was more or less like very much unheard of, especially in something that's kind of like traditionally perceived as campy as a mech show, right? And you have like kind of where Anno is, I think, now with Evangelion, where, you know, he looks upon it and he sees exactly what the perception of Evangelion as an integral piece of otaku culture, and he looks at that with kind of like I feel like it feels like a lot when you kind of read interviews and you kind of like look at how he makes the rebuilds, where it feels a lot like that Hayao Miyazaki like macro, where it's just like anime was a mistake. Where he seems to have such a hostile relationship with the people who enjoy Evangelion, and it's like so fascinating to watch, where like the end of Evangelion was just this huge indictment of the people watching it, just like, how dare you, right? And each rebuild feels like he is both exploring kind of the same like deep dark kind of like darkness within him, like this emptiness within him. You know, if we read Eva as kind of a story about Anno's depression, then the rebuilds are about him exploring that, like, you know, 20 some odd years down the line. And you get a lot of like like we get with watching it like a couple years later, Anno making it like decades later, right, is we're in a very different place. And Anno introducing Mari to destroy Evangelion, which is so, oh god, I fucking love it. So first of all, I fucking love it. Second of all, it has the same exact energy as like Attack and Dethrone God. Attack and destroy Evangelion. But I also think at the end of the day, like, I think Mari is a very divisive character in the kind of series of Evangelion. Some people like really like her. Some people really don't like what she does to the canon of the show. I think she's super interesting.
I think it's very interesting. I'm super interested in her, I guess, like, background and what she's gonna end up doing for the series. It seems like the whole concept of her destroying Ava, of course, is like wildly interesting. But then if I don't know if you've seen like the 10-minute like little tease or spoiler of 3.0 plus 1.0, but she is a huge part of that. And it's super, like, I feel like she's gonna be one of the driving forces that will end Ava essentially in the final movie.
I mean I have to think so, because like when we hit 3.0, we're kind of in uncharted water because it deviates so strongly from what the original sort of series was like. And so I think it's interesting because what you get is in Mari shows up and she is very gung-ho about piloting Ava, but she doesn't seem to have the same hang-ups that any of the other kids do. But you definitely know that there's like something a little bit like off about her.
Yes.
And about the way that she pilots an Ava. Like, she kind of can tell that the Avas are like these living creatures, and she kind of speaks to them as if they are.
Yeah.
And she also pilots them with such reckless abandon, right? Where you have Shinji, who is reckless because he is unsure and because he doesn't really know how to do things. You have Asuka, who is, reckless because she has to prove herself. You have Rei, who is reckless because she like can't fathom her kind of own existence and doesn't feel like she deserves to be alive, right? Like, you have all these characters that are so self-destructive, and they put themselves into these giant war machines to do deadly combat with world-ending threats because they're broken. They're broken children, and they're doing it to feel some amount of control in their life, but at the same time because people tell them to do so, right? And then you have Mari, who is very gung-ho about being an Ava pilot, but not in the same way that Asuka is. I think Mari exists as a foil for Asuka, largely because she takes a lot of her screen time, a lot of her development time, and also in the kind of original drafts, apparently she was supposed to take a lot of the scenes that Asuka had, but like Mari takes them instead. Where like this scene like where she says like Antabaka, or like where they like kiss, and it's like really awkward because they're like 14-year-olds that don't know how anything works, right? But like, Mari as a character, I think is very interesting because from the outset, it doesn't seem like there's anything necessarily as broken about her as the rest of the characters, but she still throws herself in to combat so readily and so recklessly, to the point of being very self-destructive. But she seems to be having like a good time of it. She seems to be highly independent, but not in the way that she has to be to survive. It seems like she just has something that she wants to do, right? And so I think that's why it's very interesting to me, Mari as a character, in contrast to both Asuka and the rest of the pilots, about where she kind of stands and like what her background is. I admittedly have not watched 3.0 like recently enough to know anything about her role in the movie. It's been a really long time since I've watched the rebuild. It's probably like 4 or 5 years. I don't remember when 3.0 came out, but yeah. So
no, I think her existence as kind of an anomaly amongst the existing pilots is super interesting, and probably one of the reasons why she was so poorly received by some of the fan base is because she just kind of comes out of nowhere. She has a lot of screen time, and she's nothing like the previous pilots that we've bonded with and whom we, we're already very familiar and fond of. And in that way, I think that she provides like a nice, refreshing take on the whole thing, I guess, like a very interesting contrast, and in that way kind of balances out the other personalities, is that, yeah, she doesn't really care as much about like the traumatic implications of Ava. She just kind of wants to delve into how fun it is to pilot. And in that way, I wonder if she's kind of rather inspired by like naysayer fan based opinions, who like people who would be like, well, why don't they just like enjoy having a giant mech to run around, and if it was me, I think that would be the best, like that kind of opinion is culminated into her existence.
I definitely agree that Mari is like a huge like middle finger to like the people who like Ava, which is again like part of that relationship that Ano has that is like, very hostile with his fan base.
Right.
And I think it's interesting because I do think Mari is like the perfect kind of character to attack and dethrone Evangelion, right?
Yeah.
So
yeah.
like both the fact that she's so different from the other pilots, and in many regards is the same, and also in the regard that she very much comes in and throws a wrench in things, and she like kind of changes the canon of the show. Like she changes things to the point where Asuka is in the in Unit 03 because of her, right? Because her arrival in Japan means that Asuka doesn't get to pilot Unit 02 anymore, right?
Yeah.
I do think it's interesting because it sets up a slightly different arc for Asuka that I'm fairly certain gets built upon in 3.0, but like again, it's been like a good handful of years since I've seen it. But like Mari is the perfect character to do so, because she is so flippant and she just like seems to really not care about all that much. She seems to be in the Ava for fun. Like she basically comes in and like destroys all your childhood memories, right? It's like when people are like, "Oh, the new She-Ra is destroying my childhood memories of the '80s cartoon," right? Mari comes in and is just like, "Oh, is this your Evangelion? This is my Evangelion now." Right?
Yeah.
And I'm honestly, I'm kind of into it. Like obviously there's like some aspects of Evangelion that will always be a little bit shall we say uncomfortable, because like Anna wants to make you uncomfortable, right?
Yeah.
About the idea of projecting and like fetishizing like 14-year-old children, and society has continued to do nothing but do those things, right? So he's just like shrug emoji, I guess. What the fuck, right? But yeah, I don't know. I think Mari is the most interesting character in 2.22, maybe. Maybe.
Sure. I mean, it's when she gets introduced, and then you don't know anything about her, and then by the end, you still don't really know a whole lot about her.
Yeah, she poses a lot of questions, and she moves a lot of pieces around, and like suddenly you don't really know what to expect anymore. Which I think for some people, because like I think people were expecting the Evangelion rebuilds just to be a retelling of the television series,
exactly.
and Anna was like,
yeah, I mean,
foolish.
2.0 literally opens with a bunch of English speakers saying stuff to each other, and then Mari is there, and she's getting launched into Ava, so he immediately just decided to to jump right into that.
Right. And I do think it's interesting because like in the original series you have Shinji who is Asuka's foil, where Shinji is a really good Evangelion pilot by chance, you know, because his mom is like the most powerful Evangelion, right? So so naturally, he's gonna be a very good pilot. Whereas Asuka feels like all of her kind of pilot aptitude is trained, right? And
yeah.
I think when you introduce a character like Mari, who is like Shinji with no reservations, where she's very clearly a skilled pilot, and she really doesn't care about taking those risks, like activating the berserk mode in 02. Like, you can tell she's probably a better pilot than Asuka, which sets up that very distinct tension where what happens when I'm not the best pilot? Will people still look at me? That's kind of the core of Asuka's character. And you have obviously her relationship with Shinji in 2.22, but you also have suddenly Mari is her foil and not just Shinji, right? You have because in the original series, like Shinji, Asuka, and Rei are this like kind of triangle match where like they each kind of complement and contrast each other, and suddenly we've turned it into a square, and that introduces a lot more possibilities, which I think is fascinating. Like I don't know, I might just be the world's biggest Mari apologist, but like I feel like she's one of the most interesting things that happens in the entire movie.
Yeah, I mean, she very obviously, like, I want to say, contrasts and kind of antagonizes each of the three existing pilots in their own way.
Right.
She does it more against Rei in 3.0, but in 2.0, she definitely like sets up some tension against Shinji and Asuka for sure.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I feel like it's kind of a moot point to talk about the animation at this point. Like, it's still probably one of the most gorgeous animated movies to ever exist.
Yep.
There, I think, is literally nothing else in the world that has the kind of weighty, like, heavy impact of the Evangelions.
Yeah.
And like the very uncannily human way in which they move, which I think is awesome. It's very unsettling and very cool. This is obviously the movie where we get Unit 01 like berserk mode, which is tasty. Oh, you love to see uncanny nom 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 nom. But actually, I was thinking about this the other day when I was watching, where Hideaki Anno's background is in like tokusatsu, like fan works, right? He cut like an Ultraman fan movie back in his like college days, back when it was very hard to make movies, right? But I honestly, I think like part of the reason he like ever really wanted to tackle something like Evangelion was that, right? He wanted to make like a tokusatsu thing, but he also wanted to kind of, I'm imagining, imbue it with a lot of the kind of subversion of that, because tokusatsu is like, it's interesting because tokusatsu is very like sincere. It's very straightforward sincerity. I think recent ones have been a little bit more complicated. I know that Gen Urabuchi wrote a season of Kamen Rider, or a series of Kamen Rider, I should say. But for the most part, right? Like it's very shonen action. It's very like,
right.
We will use the power of human will to overcome any and all obstacles. Whereas Evangelion is like, we must use the power of the human will to overcome any and all obstacles, but at what cost? Which is like, oh, we're drafting children into God War, and if they become too aware of what's happening, they will ascend to godhood. They will fuse with their Evangelions and become new beings. And it's actually, that is another thing that I wanted to talk about, at least briefly, where like on the topic of apocalypse, right? Apocalypse does not necessarily mean the end of the world. It just means the end of things as you know it, right?
Right.
So when you have the threat of the pilots awakening and becoming new beings, right? The cost of that is the extermination of the old beings, that is to say, the rest of humanity. And that's like a very, like, I think that's a very like generational anxiety to have, right?
Yeah.
Obviously, like Japan has a lot of anxiety in general about like colonialism and reverse colonialism, quote unquote, right? Any empire has a lot of anxiety about the collapse of said empire. And specifically, oftentimes, empires built upon the idea of racial superiority or racial supremacy have the very specific anxiety of replacement, right? The idea that we as the dominant race will be replaced by an inferior one, right?
Right, yeah.
And it dominates everything from like white supremacy to like, Japanese like hardline like right-wing kind of ideology about what Japan is supposed to look like, where most people in Japan, I think at this point, reasonably speaking, are like, yeah, like a multicultural kind of like multi-ethnic Japan is the future of Japan. A lot of people have anxieties about that, and it's just like, but will we still be Japanese people if
right.
if we're not racially Japanese? And the answer is, yeah, probably actually. That's probably how it works, right?
Yeah.
But it is an anxiety that empires have, especially ones built upon the idea of racial supremacy. So you have this idea of like humans, especially like old institution humans, being like, we're very afraid of what young people can do.
Yeah.
Like we are very afraid that young people will change the world beyond our recognition, and it will be unlivable for us. And I don't know if that's something that Ono himself specifically has as an anxiety, but I do think that it is pervasive in a lot of Japanese works. But very much in Evangelion, it feels like if we take the apocalypse too far, the world will become unlivable for us in the old guard, right?
Right.
And I think Ono kind of has a very complicated relationship to that, because I think a lot of what he sees in that metaphor is more about the kind of personal self-actualization, about like what happens when you become a being that is unapproachable by all others, and you just kind of inadvertently destroy the people around you as a result. But yeah, I mean that's definitely something that you can read into Evangelion. Like how will they and their ideas be so alien to you that you cannot exist any longer as you have been? You will be annihilated.
Right.
Right. Because it's like, the nature of apocalypse is destruction, but also, generally speaking, rebirth. The idea of the post-apocalypse is something that we've been grappling with for quite a long time as a species, but also very much a lot recently for, I can't imagine why, but I'm sure some reason. I'm trying to put my finger on it, but like, anyway. But look, the idea of like the rise of civilization and then the coming apocalypse is this cycle of violence. It is an existence that is defined by the idea of violence. Of course, violence not just being like physical violence, but the idea of the removal of one's agency as the idea of violence, right? The existence of your personage in society is violence, because you are enacting violence upon the people around you. But that is kind of at the base of how we exist as a society. And a lot of this is tied up in the idea of Shinji as the main character of Evangelion. Because, we've talked about how he's a subversion of the willing shonen protagonist, and how he is like instrumental to the events of the world, if we understand Evangelion as Sekai-kei, right? because the world revolves around his mental state and his relationships, and it changes to reflect those things. And so it's very interesting when you have the rebuilds where different things are happening and suddenly the world is different, right?
Yeah.
But like the idea of why is that the case, and I might have touched on this before, but like the idea that you that as an adolescent coming into adulthood feels like its own kind of apocalypse, where where the world is both outside of and completely within your control, and things are happening and you're not really sure how they're connected to you, but you know that they are. I think finally, like, the thing about Shinji that interests me is the idea that he is a reluctant hero, and it is only when he is like forced to and driven to, but also motivated to take action. It is when he is motivated by his own desire to save Rei, you know, a desire that he says is, you know, for Rei to be alive. But Misato is like, Shinji, that's just you, bud. You want that, right? That being the kind of most powerful thing in the world, like the idea of willing compelling a reluctant person into action, right? I think that idea stands as one of the most powerful things you could do, because if you can will people into doing things, something can change, right? Suddenly,
right?
Because if you start to, you know, inspire other people to organize or act in a certain way, that has ripple effects, and that truly can change the world. So yeah. One more note on the rebuilds as kind of a concept. I know we've talked about how the the idea of the rebuilds as Anno kind of sticking his tongue out at the fans of Evangelion. I do think it's a very it is a very like weird thing to watch Evangelion as like before the final movie comes out. Like, I think the world after the last movie of Evangelion comes out will be a very different world than the one that came into it. Not just because we're living in the midst of a global pandemic, but like the fact that just the fact that like there is a weird quality to the fact that Evangelion is not done yet, right? Where Evangelion is an ongoing project.
Right.
The sort of ontological existence of Evangelion as an ongoing project is very fascinating to me.
I think it is so fittingly hilarious that Evangelion 3.0 plus 1.0 was slated to come out this year. The year in which the world went to crap. And then, you know, it's coming out next month, presumably.
Presumably. Yeah.
Like, once the hailstorm is kind of ish over / not really.
Like, what happens to Hideaki Anno after this movie? Does he just say, "All right, I'm done with Evangelion forever. Fuck you, goodbye. I'm gonna direct Godzilla movies for the rest of the time"? Or will he come back in like 15 years and be like, "All right, guys, it's time for Evangelion Rebuild to Electric Boogaloo"?
I think, man, maybe I'd be happy if he could work on something completely new and separate of Eva, like really stretch his wings or retires.
Yeah. I mean, that's like the thing, right? Where like I would love to see other things by Hideaki Anno that are not Evangelion, right? Evangelion has been kind of the majority of the body of Anno's work. For, I mean, obviously a lot of reasons. It has some of the most like kind of integral impact to the structure of anime as a medium, right? But you know, at the end of the day, I think Anno wants to be done with Evangelion too. Like, he basically made Mario, so he was like, I want you to destroy Evangelion. I want you to destroy Evangelion. I suspect that in 3.0 plus 1.0, he will make it happen.
Yeah, man.
So
do it.
So yeah, I think that's it. I think I've exhausted 2.22 for the moment. Inevitably, when I watch it in a couple years, I'll be like, "Ah, shit." All right. Well, I guess that's it for the last episode of the year. That's kind of wild. Do you want to?
That's crazy. Oh my god.
Yeah. Anything you want to talk about before we close out?
Hey man, it's been 3 years with all you guys out there, and it's been such a wild ride. We started with Hideaki Anno's Wild Ride, and we're still on it.
Yeah, we're still on Hideaki Anno's Wild Ride. We'll probably be on it for a little while longer.
Yeah.
And who knows? We don't know what the world has in store for Evangelion, but maybe one day we as a society will outgrow the need for Evangelion. But for the moment, it still stands as quite the remarkable kind of important landmark piece of animation it is. And which is funny because every time Evangelion comes out again, you're like, ah, damn it. Ah, damn it. This is still really good. Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah. Reminiscing on like 3 years worth of podcast is it's pretty wild. It has it's been a wild ride, and I'm very glad that you could all sort of join us for it.
Yeah. It doesn't feel like it's been quite that long, right?
No, it doesn't. Not at all.
Yeah.
But then again, I mean, it feels like we've been doing the podcast for a year and it's been 3. So, I don't know what to say, really. I mean, probably part of that was just due to the fact that we started like weekly and then went bi-weekly and then decided to go monthly. So I think like we're at about the amount of episodes we would be at if we had gone for... Because if we had gone weekly, we're on episode 65. If we had gone weekly, like, we would be done with 1 year and a bit.
Yeah.
So that probably is part of what contributes to it, which is funny because like every time I have the podcast deadline, I'm like, oh no, it's here. But yeah, I'm super glad that you can all join us, and I hope we can bring you some amount of entertainment in these unforgiving times. I mean, what more is there to say than I hope we can make next year a good one, and that, and that you have hopefully at least I'm not gonna say a good, but I hope you at least have a peaceful last couple days of the year, or you have had a peaceful rest of the year. I suppose I should say. That is my only hope, and you know. We have to keep each other strong in these times. We have to outstretch our AT fields and I don't know, gut tie them or something. I don't know. Anyway, our opening is, as always, by Scotty Network, and our ending is by Takuma Okada, and we're very, very grateful because this OP and ED have been standing by us for quite a long time. And, and we're very thankful. I mean, I paid money for them, but like we're very thankful nonetheless.
Yes.
Yeah. And the patrons we are thanking this week are Evan, Cheru, Frostfall, Sean, Magpie Mirror Test, Undead Uncanny, Claire, and Dylan. Thank you so much for your support.
Dude, thank you.
It really does mean a lot.
Yeah.
And oh boy, I guess like have had a good winter and or winter holidays if you celebrate any. May the coming times be more restful and peaceful than they have been for the last, I don't know, forever.
Yeah. Have a happy New Year.
Yeah, have a happy New Year. And I think on that note, we will see you next time.
See you next time.
さようなら。また明日ね。